Good evening. My name is Jennifer Abaid, and I'm the mother of a child with autism. And I'm also the director of ParentChild Plus at Boys Town, South Florida. We're so happy you could join us for this very special event, Windows, Mirrors, and Doors, the importance of disability representation in children's books. The start of the school year is an ideal time to reflect on the importance of representation for young children with disabilities. Early exposure to the ways we are different and alike opens our minds, shapes our beliefs, and leads to real change. Before we jump in, I want to start by telling you a little bit about this organization that I care so much about. ParentChild Plus is a national nonprofit organization focused on partnering with families in historically marginalized communities to prepare their children for school success, challenging the barriers and lack of support that are too often put in their way. We serve over 10,000 families with young children across 142 locally run program sites in the U.S. And we do this by using research-based supports to engage and empower children's first and most important teachers, their parents. Tonight, we're here to talk about one of the most critical pieces of early education, children's literature. If our parents are the most important teachers, then books are among their most important tools. The books that kids read during childhood and into young adulthood play a fundamental role in shaping how they view themselves, the world, and their place in it. One thing I have noticed about my daughter is that even though she is nonverbal and unable to express in words how she feels about books, TV shows, or movies, she expresses how she feels through her body language. Every time I turn on a documentary or video blog about autism, or read a book or an article about a child with autism, her eyes light up. She sits very still and pays close attention. And this is unusual for her, since she is always on the move and rarely shows interest in books or watching anything on the TV except for music videos. And it is interesting that it was only when I was first approached about being involved in this discussion today that I realized that I have never actually seen a children's book with characters that look like my daughter or that represent her. In fact, in the US, while over 3 million children, 4.3% of the under 18 population have a disability, only 3.4% of children's books have disabled main characters. Since my daughter has the kind of disability that is hard to see unless you spend time with her and observe her mannerisms and behaviors, most children do not understand her condition. And as a result, she gets ignored by her neurotypical peers. When we are out and about, there are always kids her age who try to talk to her, but because she cannot respond with words, they usually just walk away. This is where I see the value of disability representation in children's books. These books can help raise awareness about how isolating it can be when a nonverbal child is discounted by their peers because they cannot talk and/or because of their unique mannerisms. There is just so much awareness that could be raised through children's books with disability representation. We have had families in our program who have children with disabilities, or a program child may show signs of being on the autism spectrum, but has not yet been diagnosed. And this is another reason awareness is so important. It could literally save a life. I always say safety is number one for children on the spectrum. What many do not know is that nearly half of children with autism are wanderers or elopers, are attracted to the water, and will walk into traffic because they have no sense of danger. Many times families learn this the hard way, like we did. It is important to educate families with a newly diagnosed child on the importance of keeping their child safe first and foremost. My older daughter also has her unique challenges as the sibling of a child with a disability. It would be great to see more books that reflect her reality as well. At ParentChild Plus, we use screening tools like the Ages and Stages questionnaire, the ASQ, to support families in identifying any challenges for their children, and then connect families to other supports for their children. Some families may receive a disability diagnosis at some point while they are participating in our program. And for them and all the other families who have friends and family members with disabilities, we believe incorporating children's books with disability representation into our program is of great value to all participating. As part of ParentChild Plus's mission, we've committed to provide all families with reading materials that are diverse, inclusive, and culturally relevant. We want to help children understand the importance of equity, feel rooted in their own identity, and develop a strong sense of self and understanding of others. That's why we've invited you here tonight for a conversation with children's book authors and experts in the parenting community on the importance of disability representation in children's literature. This discussion will highlight the importance for children and families of experiencing books featuring characters with disabilities, equipping parents and caregivers with the tools to engage children in reading and discussing this literature, and to advocate for improvements in disability representation. At ParentChild Plus, we believe representation and book selection can be a powerful step toward building a stronger, more equitable world. We have an amazing panel and fireside chat tonight. There will be time for questions, so please put them in the chat. Now, to kick off the evening, please join me in welcoming Julie Merberg, who will be moderating our first panel. Julie is the founder and president of Downtown Bookworks and author of a number of best-selling titles, including My First Book of Girl Power and The Power of Kindness.
Hi, thank you, Jennifer. As Jennifer just said, my name is Julie Merberg. I'm founder and publisher of Downtown Bookworks. Just quickly, a little bit about the mission of my company. We feel strongly that big ideas can be translated in a meaningful way for little people, and as often as possible, we try to do just that. We also see it as an honor and an obligation to introduce diverse voices and visuals to publish books that all children can connect with, to open minds and hearts in the hopes that they will stay that way. So that's what I do as a publisher. When we're publishing nonfiction, we showcase diverse, real people, making sure that in a boy's puberty book, for example, we present kids of every color, size, shape, gender identity, and sexual preference. And in publishing fictional books, maybe about superheroes, for example, we ensure that we're representing characters who look different, have different abilities and superpowers, come from different places, even from different types of families and different viewpoints. As Jennifer pointed out, we all know it's really important for children to be able to recognize themselves in their entertainment. They need to feel seen. And in addition to that reason for inclusivity in publishing, it's also important for kids to learn about experiences outside of their own home or community. Kids are naturally open-minded. They don't judge. They're also curious. Interesting people and great stories are a terrific way to expose them to otherness, to engage them, and to expand their understanding of the world around them. So now I'm going to introduce our fabulous panel. First off, Cece Bell has written and illustrated many books for children, including the Newbery Honor and Eisner-winning graphic novel memoir, El Deafo, which I loved, which chronicles her childhood experiences with deafness. Next up, we have Khalil Munir, who is a performer, educator, tap dancer, and speaker. He was born weighing 1 pound and 4 ounces. Try to wrap your mind around that. He's also the author of The Crown is Yours. And lastly, we have Jessica Rolfe, who is co-founder and CEO of the early learning brand Love Every. Prior to launching this brand, Jessica was co-founder and COO of Happy Family, which you probably all recognize if you have children, helping to launch, build, and lead Happy Family to its position as a top organic baby and toddler brand in the US. So I'm going to start my questions with Cece. I'm actually deaf in one ear and I have hearing loss in the other. And I gave your book, El Defo, to all four of my sons so that they could understand what it's like to live inside of my head. And I've also just recommended it to tons of other kids because I just think it's such a great and fun book. So, you wrote many books before writing El Defo. I'm very curious about your journey, how you first got into illustrating and writing children's books, and then what led you to decide to write about your own experience with deafness.
Okay, that's a great question. And thank you very much for having me here. It's a real honor and a privilege to be here. So thank you. Gosh, I had sort of a winding road kind of journey because I, for a long time, was not sure what I should be doing with my life. And I was very good academically in school and, plowed right ahead and made the good grades, but without any kind of direction. And a part of that is I don't think, I think I was a little worried that my hearing loss would get in the way of certain careers. For example, if I wanted to be a surgeon, how would I understand what everyone was saying with the mask? And I was right about that because we've been working with masks and it's almost impossible. So eventually, I'd always loved drawing, and it's a very visual thing. And I felt like this is something that I can do and be good at because I don't need to have to hear to do this. So in the first part of my life as a children's book writer and an illustrator, I was not ready to talk about my deafness at all. And in fact, I would be shocked that I had ever spoken about it at all. 30-year-old me would say, "There's no way this is possible that 42-year-old me would do this," because I just wasn't ready. So all of my books are previous to this are very funny, and I think that's always my goal. I'm a funny person. I want people to think that's a funny person, and not funny like funny in the head, but just I make people laugh, and that was just really important to me. Just it's like my ticket. It's how I engage with the world, and it's how I sort of offset other people's discomfort when they first meet me. It's like I'm just going to make them laugh right away, and we can get this out of the way, kind of thing. So I think that was my goal forever. And then eventually, I got to a point where I was just disgusted with myself for not being able to talk about being a deaf person. And it was really, I was tired of that and almost ashamed of myself for not being able to discuss it. So I thought, I'm just going to lay it all out there, but I can still be funny. And that was sort of how I got to that book. But it's almost like I had to prove myself first. And I didn't want to go out into the world being that deaf author and illustrator. I wanted to be that deaf author and illustrator who happens to be deaf. And that was just really important to me to set that up first. And then I was able to tell the harder stuff, if that makes sense.
It makes so much sense to me that you wanted to just have success in your own right.
Right.
And then, so that's so interesting to me that then once you felt secure in your place in the publishing world,
Right.
that then, because what you really did with El Defo, or one of the things that you did was you made it cool, you made deafness and disability really, cool and funny. And I'm wondering what kind of response you got from readers when you did come out with that book.
The response was amazing. And maybe the best thing for me was that it connected me with other deaf people and other people who had a similar experience, because I'm very much in the hearing world. I'm the only deaf person in my family. I lost my hearing I had been a hearing person, and so my brain sort of imprinted with, you're a hearing person, but I'm not. I'm a deaf person too, but I'm in these two worlds. But it connected me with people with similar experiences. But maybe even better was the main response I got was, this is a book about being lonely and feeling isolated, and everybody feels that way, and everybody feels different. And I think it was neat to see it resonate with everybody, and it didn't have to be a person with a hearing loss or anything, and everybody has something going on. And that's what I found out, every single person. And once we know that about people and make ourselves, accept that we're vulnerable and share that, it's a great unifier. I mean, it's just a wonderful thing to be able to know that about people. So I hope, my main hope with the book is that it will help people talk about themselves and be cool with it, because I could not talk about myself for a long, long time. And it's very freeing. It's like, yay, woohoo, I'm deaf, I'm whatever, and I think it's really fun to be able to do that and be okay with it. So.
Yeah, I hear you. I know. I mean, even, with my own hearing loss, like I will, when, I used to be so tense sitting in meetings and worrying that I was going to miss something. And eventually I realized, that's crazy. And I
Right.
will walk into a conference room and say, hey guys, I'm hard of hearing, so you're going to have to talk really loud and look at me.
Right.
Otherwise, you
Yeah.
won't get a response. And it is incredibly freeing. And, and I love what you said also about everybody has something. We all do. Nobody's perfect. Everybody has something. And I think putting it all out there creates a lot of empathy. And it's so important also when we're dealing with children. As I said earlier, there isn't judgment, and to create that space where we can just all be open and honest about our differences is so important. So I'm going to now, I'm going to move to Khalil for my next question. Can you tell us a bit about your childhood experiences? What inspired you to write The Crown Is Yours?
So, I was diagnosed with dyslexia at the age of 14. So prior to that, I wasn't diagnosed, and I had a very difficult time in school. And I really didn't like school. I didn't like reading. I didn't like any of those things. I can remember a time where I would be on the number 2 bus in Philadelphia, and my mother would pull the stop request bell, and the lights would flash, stop request, but I couldn't read it. And it was like torture getting on the bus every day, not being able to read those words. So that was my experience with literature and with words. Was very, very difficult for me. So I decided to create a show as an artist, entitled 1 Pound 4 Ounces, talking about my life's journey. And I realized that the show couldn't reach a certain demographic of kids. So I decided to write the children's book, The Crown Is Yours. Also, one of my main influences was my beautiful son, Kaori. When he came into the world, I wanted him to see himself in literature. I wanted him to see a protagonist in literature, someone that looked like him in literature. But I also wanted to tackle the hidden disability of being dyslexic and having a person of color, a brown boy of color, dealing with these learning hurdles, and his mother saying that his crown is his, but he just has to have the courage to wear it, and he can overcome any adverse situation. And this happens to be his hurdle, which is dyslexia. So I wanted to tell my story. It's based on myself. It's a true story. My whole life changed when I won this oratorical contest, and it put me on a path to the arts and where I am now in terms of like being a being a performing artist, and like you said earlier, a tap dancer and things of that nature. So that was one of the main reasons why I wanted to write the book, is to share the story about hidden disabilities, to show little brown boys as protagonists.
So you said you were diagnosed at 14. That's pretty late
Very late.
in your school career. And so I think something that most people don't talk about with learning differences is the anxiety that can engender. You know, when you talked about being on the bus and not being able to read what the sign said. And I mean, I felt that stress. And
So I'm sorry.
no, I was just going to ask you if you could talk about that, because it does sort of go hand in hand with any kind of learning difference if you're in a traditional learning environment.
I had stomach ulcers. So I would develop stomach ulcers because of the stress. I didn't want to go to school. And unfortunately, I didn't have the language or the tools to be able to verbalize or advocate for myself. So unfortunately, the only way that I knew how to get out of class was to do something disruptive in class, be a distraction, um, be a behavior problem, so I could get out of the classroom and be in the principal's office. Now that I'm in the principal's office, I no longer have to be in the classroom or deal with the work or deal with that level of stress. And for my situation, coming from South Philadelphia, my home life really wasn't the best at the time. So I had to couple that with a disability. So my stress levels were extremely high.
I'm sorry. I feel that pain. I do. And then when did you get the support that you needed in school, or how did you wear the crown? You know, how did you
So
get from there to here?
I was blessed in the sense that I had a fourth grade teacher. Her name is Jean Sugars, and she had a friend by the name of Vicki Livingston. And at the time, um, Vicky's husband, Donald Livingston, was the president of Cigna. And Cigna was the big brother of Child School, the school that I went to. And Miss Sugars would ask Miss Livingston, because I was in a learning disabilities program since I was in second grade. She would ask, well, how come you never take any of my kids into your classroom for the specialty classes? And they decided to take me into the specialty class. And once that happened, there was an oratorical contest, and they put me in the oratorical contest. And I still couldn't read it. I still couldn't read the poem. So I would try to figure out ways to get over that hurdle. So I went home, I asked my mother to read the poem to me. She recorded it, and I would listen to it to learn it. And once I learned it, I was able to perform it in such a way where I won the contest. So once I won the contest, they got me involved in Freedom Theater. So that put me on my path to the arts. So I was really blessed with a teacher who really, really, truly cared and advocated for me. She's still with me to this day, and they were with me from second grade, really up into marriage, because they've been in my life since second grade and so now. So they're like family, actually. So I was actually a blessed child to be able to have a community of educators like wrapping themselves around me with love.
You hear this all the time. My mom was a teacher, a public school teacher, and you always hear these stories about that person who changed lives, and that's great. I'm glad you found those people in your life. I'm going to turn to Jessica now. Jessica, in addition to all of your, early learning brand building, you have written a book called Uncle Rob's Pizza Party, inspired by your brother. I would love to know how your childhood experience motivated you to write this book, what it was like growing up, in a family with a sibling with special needs, and what you hope other children take away from this book, how you would ideally see it used, what your goal is in publishing this.
Yeah, thank you for having me. grew up with Rob has Angelman syndrome, and I grew up as just in love and admiration. We kind of a really close family. And when I had my own children, I have 3 children. My third child, my daughter, became very fearful of Rob. So we would have family gatherings, and she was 2 and 3 years old, and she didn't want to be in the same room as Rob. Part of Angelman syndrome is an interest in food and compulsivity towards food. And so he would grab her lollipop and start eating it, and she would melt down. He crawls to move around, and a grown man crawling really threw her off, and she, just became really scared of him. And so my sister suggested that we create a social story for B so that she could understand how important Rob is to our family and learn a little bit more about Angelman syndrome. And so we use that kind of inspiration to think more universally at Love Every about what are 3-year-olds, how are they making sense of the world? So 3-year-olds love to categorize. And as we think about child development, kind of assessments, we oftentimes see, can children sort by color, by shape? Can they understand what goes in a category and what goes out of a category? So that actually also applies to people at 3. And children at 3 aren't looking to, be not inclusive, but they are making sense of the world, and they're noticing. My daughter noticed that Rob didn't fit into what she was used to as far as an adult male that she was used to. She had behaviors. And so what we wanted to do was create a story featuring photographs of Rob and the residents of his group home, and tell a universal story to offer a door or a window into what Angelman syndrome is like, and answer very directly for a child, why doesn't Rob walk? Why doesn't he talk? Why doesn't he act like me? And be able to explain that to a child in kind of a real story of, B visiting Rob for a pizza party is the story at his house, and meeting the other residents and understanding and learning what makes them unique. And then building this bridge so that, for us, it was kind of a very personal story, for B to really start to feel comfortable with Rob in our family. And it really did make such a difference. And I think these social stories, I don't think that 3-year-olds are getting enough real life literature, like real life photography. They're craving understanding about the real world. And when they ask questions like, are you a boy or a girl, to somebody whose gender may not be clear to them, they're categorizing by gender. And when they ask those questions, or when they ask, why is that person in a wheelchair, or don't ask but stare, I think it can make parents really uncomfortable. And that discomfort that we all feel, which is so natural because we have empathy and want to do the right thing, if you will, can then actually make the child feel shame, and then perpetuate that feeling of that something is happening over here that's different. And so we like to guide parents in our guidebooks at Love Every that pairs with the book, and help parents give words to these interactions, and kind of make it a little bit more of a universal way of understanding the 3-year-old brain and how they can make sense of their world.
That's really interesting. So you wrote this book for your daughter, but your experience was as a sister. And I'm just wondering, when you were growing up, like what tools did you have at your disposal to sort of understand what this life was? And also, I imagine, also maybe deal with guilt and shame. Because I imagine it wasn't, always a picnic having a brother with special needs who maybe took a lot of your parents' attention. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, and I'm curious because you are in a position to, to enlighten other parents, having been at both sides of this equation.
Yeah, for us, I think that the truth for me was that it was just very much learning and discovering Rob over the years, and discovering kind of who he is as a person, what his likes are and what his dislikes are, and what he is as a person. It's really evolved. So we did not have a diagnosis for Angelman syndrome until much later in his life. And so it was a lot of therapies, and we did a lot of therapy for individuals that volunteer and come into our home every hour, doing like physical work with him. We were in we tried to do this program that would have patterning and move him and crawling motions as a 4 and 5-year-old to try and stimulate brain development. And there was lots of things that we did as a family, but there were no real tools, but I think that it was normal. It was normal to me because that's just who Rob is. I think what's been hard is to see my own daughter have a fear of my brother. And that was hard, and recognizing that, and also see my daughter point out, and she's also very extroverted, and point out to somebody who has a limb difference and who's skiing, why do you only have one leg? And ask that person directly. Those are those kind of uncomfortable. She asked, somebody point blank, are you a boy or girl at the store? So those kinds of stories are inspiring kind of us to lean in a little bit more and give parents more tools so that they can help their children, help them feel confident in how they're guiding their children to be, again, this like society that we want of inclusivity and support and awareness. But I think we can't kind of leave parents to figure it out on their own.
Okay, I am now that we sort of got a little, introduction to how your books came about, I'm going to circle back. I want to go back to Cece. I'm really intrigued. You talked about the way you use humor, and I think I just wrote a book called Nice Jewish Girls, like Nice Jewish Girls, and I profiled a number of comedians in the book, and to me it was really interesting because the Joan Rivers, that era, her comedy was all built on self-deprecation. And then, Sarah Silverman, who's younger and, grew up, not post-Holocaust, but, she's a contemporary and, and is very kind of out there and bold, but does talk about how she as a kid would always kind of use humor to disarm. And then you've got like the next stage was the Broad City girls like Alana Glazer and Abby Jacobson, who are just like in your face with Jewish, like unapologetic. And I feel like, maybe you were talking about how, you're always funny, like trying to make people around you feel comfortable. But then your humor took on this other flavor. And I don't know, maybe I'm reading into it, but I would love to hear about the way that you use your humor and use your art, not just in LDEFO and not just in talking about deafness, but in, in your other, throughout your work.
Okay, wow. I think almost all, when I look at all of my books together, I think almost all of them are about communication in some way and about misunderstandings, because my life is nothing but a series of misunderstandings. So you can either be bummed out that you don't understand anything, or you can see all the funky wordplay that happens when you don't always lip read people correctly. And I've made so many mistakes that are hilarious. And some of them are just like so inappropriate. But those are my favorite kinds, if I ever get to do an adult book. But they're all about communicating, and there's so much humor in communicating. And so a lot of the books, even that I've done, have speech balloons in them as part of the story, or the whole story is told in speech balloons where characters are just talking back and forth. And that's so much of comedy in general is having fun with words. But I think more than, like Sarah Silverman scares me, for example, because what is she gonna say next? But for me, it's almost always about wordplay. I come from a family that everybody seems to have some some version of echolalia going on. We love repetitive humor. We love to say the same thing over and over and just irritate people until they start laughing. And that works really well in early reader books, which is all about repeating things and finding new ways to say the same thing again and again and again, and it gets funnier and funnier and funnier. So, so I actually feel like all those misunderstandings, that's the silver lining of my life as a storyteller, is that I can have fun with these misunderstandings, put them in my work in some way, and also because I have to get people's faces all of the time and not just read what they're saying, but read their emotions, I feel like it has made me a better artist in conveying at least people's emotions or care, or, you know, animals that are people, whatever. But I think with just a few lines, I feel very confident in portraying how people are feeling in the stories. So I sort of got off topic, but I think that's kind of what my kind of humor is. It's just, it's almost more like playful. I try hard. I'm not sarcastic. I don't like sarcasm. And like Joan Rivers, woo! I mean, I love watching comedians work, but if I was a comedian on stage, I would not go in the direction that some of those folks go. It would be definitely self-deprecating and far goofier. The goofier, the better.
It is, and I love the way, you know, you've flipped disability on its head and making, you know, your character a superhero.
Right.
Right. And I can't tell you how much I love the messaging of that. And do you want to talk about that a little bit? And I think that also segues into what Khalil's doing in his work.
So yeah, that was definitely, I did have that name. That was definitely a nickname that I came up for myself when I was younger. But I didn't see myself as a superhero at all, except I liked the way that sounded. It made me feel, you know, if other people were going to call me this, and no one ever did call me that, I was just prepared. You know, I'm going to be prepared if they do. All right, I've got it. And I have this, you know, fake Spanish, which it's not Spanish. It's just this weird thing that I came up with as a kid. But El Defo was really for those moments when you have a difficult interaction with someone. And I am extremely non-confrontational. I never stood up for myself. I was, you know, just very shy. I couldn't do the things I needed to do to advocate for myself. But when I would get home and I would think about that interaction, it was like, well, here's what I should have done, and here's what I should have said. And if you think like that long enough, eventually it does catch up to you and you do those things. But I have to be really pushed to get to that point. And even today, I'm still, you know, it takes a lot for me to actually stand up and say something, but I've come a long way. So I'm really not that superhero. That's who I wanted to be. Yeah.
You know, I am. The pandemic has been just like prime ground for misunderstandings with the masks and the plexiglass. I know every time I go to the pharmacy, I just stand there and I go, I can't understand what you're saying. One time I had the pharmacist text me because I just could not figure out what was going on.
Absolutely. But on the flip side, here we are, and I've gotten to attend so many meetings this way, like what we're doing right now.
Right.
And for the first time in my life, I have the best seat at the table every time, and I can follow the meeting. And I've never been able to follow the meeting. I'll get like the first 5 minutes, and then I tune out, and I'm over there in the corner picking my nose because, you know, I don't know. So anyway, this is the good part. And the other side, mask part, is the worst, but I'm happy for people to be wearing them. So it's like, no, leave it on. I have to explain every time, you know, I'm hard of hearing or, you know, I'm deaf, whatever. And I'm a lip reader. I'm not going to understand what you say. I have this app, blah, blah, blah. It goes on. But people are nice about it. And it's actually helped me say the words over and over again and find out that people are cool with it. Like, oh, okay. So it's been good. It hasn't been good in the grander scope of things.
Right. But there are still silver linings to Zoom.
Yeah.
Khalil, can you talk a little bit about the learning disability as superpower? I know, like, if I have a son who's ADHD, and when we, was like similarly struggled and had all this anxiety, school anxiety, and then we got the diagnosis, and I turned it around and I just said, your mind is doing so many cool things at once and you're really creative. And, as soon as you're outside of a classroom environment, it's really empowering, that you can do all these things that other people can't do. So I'm wondering, how you obviously, became this incredibly gifted public speaker. Can you just address that a little bit? Because we have about 4 minutes left, I think, and we'll come back to you as well, Jessica.
So it's exactly that, right? Flipping it on its head and being unapologetically yourself, and like really taking the power and standing in the power, opposed to coming from a place of guilt or shame or being a victim. And I really do think it's a superpower, because I think completely different and outside of the box than my peers. And I think it's I contribute my creative side due to my disability, and the empathy that I have for people. I contribute that to my disability as well. So really like flipping it on its head and like saying, yo, I'm here. I love myself, and I'm not going to be ashamed. I'm not going to hold the guilt around it. And I am that powerful individual that can show up in the world and handle anything, because I do have that crown and that cape, and I can push through. So just really, really flipping on his head and coming from a place of power.
And Jessica, I just wanted to come back to you with a different question. You've clearly done so much research on early learning, and I loved how you were talking a little bit about how young children sort. And, do you have anything else that's, I'm sure, can you compact, years of research that you've done into an important takeaway regarding, as it relates to this discussion? I would just love to know what you have to share with us.
Well, I'm so inspired, honestly. I mean, I will say that ADHD is highly correlated with entrepreneurship and starting companies.
Right.
And I have seen so much resilience and hard work coming out of my husband has a learning difference, and I think that there's a lot of themes around just extra hard work. And of Cece, I'm assuming this was for you as well. And that hard work is so correlated with just success in life, being able to accomplish your dreams and getting to what you want. And I think that adversity that people can face can be just really turned around and turned into that superhero moment where you're just like, hey, I did this. I worked hard and I busted through barriers and I did it. So I just wanted to comment how inspiring it is to be on this panel. For young children, I would say that we don't give them enough credit for what they're trying to take in terms of the world. And I think that we need to be direct with them. And it's so scary and hard, especially now. We feel like we could say the wrong thing. We could hurt somebody else's feelings. But I think that helping children be honest with their questions. And there was a comment from a parent with a child with a disability that said she'd prefer to have direct questions rather than stares. And I think that the more parents can really lean into that and start to just try and, get the tools. We are trying to be here as Love Every as tools for parents to feel confident in being able to navigate those conversations. And we're producing a lot more books. They're all, real life images. A little girl with a limb difference will be coming out soon. She's a customer of ours, and she this mom asked to feature her daughter and an encounter with another girl at the park and sort of mimicking what happens. So I think that the more we can kind of tell those social stories and help empower children, there's so much potential to raise a new generation that has a totally different view of the concept of a disability.
I agree. I agree. Oh, okay. I'm getting a note here. We were supposed to have a Q&A, but we're not going to have a Q&A. So we are going to wrap up this panel. Did I miss anything before we move on to the fireside chat portion? Is there anything anybody wants to add about inclusion in children's book publishing? I mean, the only point that I wanted to reiterate is that, I said at the top that, if you have, and Jessica, we had talked about this in our preview meeting, just how, an interesting story and compelling characters can change a kid's whole world view. So it's exciting, to see you guys publishing these books, and and to know that when we reach kids in their early development, when their minds are open and can just give them an experience outside of what they're seeing in their own home or their own classroom or their own community, I think we're doing something really important. So does anybody have anything to add? And otherwise we will say goodbye and move on to the fireside chat.
I just want to say thank you for having me. This was a pleasure. It was an honor being here. And I think these stories are so important to tell. And I'm just encouraging you beautiful individuals to continue telling your story.
I'm so with you on that.
It was great to meet everybody here, and thank you for having me. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, ParentChild. I just, I was invited to moderate, and it was such a treat to meet all of you and to have this conversation. So next up, I get to introduce an amazing woman who is the mother of 4, 2 of whom are on the autism spectrum. Jenna Mann is also co-founder of Wolf and Friends, which is a community for parents of children with special needs. And she's also my sister. So here is Jenna Mann.
Hello, so happy to be here. Thanks, Julie, my sister. My name is Jenna Mann. As you heard, I'm a mom of 4 children. 2 of my children are on the autism spectrum. I'm also the co-founder of Wolf and Friends. We are a community for parents and caregivers raising children with disabilities, as well as the providers that support them. We started our community because of the isolating experience that parents have when their children receive any sort of diagnosis that puts them on a track that's different from typical kids. These parents like me, are desperate for connection and empathy, and ultimately so are their kids. I wanted to introduce also with me here in this fireside chat, Rina Patel. She is a parenting expert, a positive psychologist, and a licensed educational board certified behavior analyst. Hi, Rina. Oop, you're muted.
Hi, thanks.
Hello. Tell us about yourself, Rita.
Well, I am an educational psychologist working in the school system for over, 25 years. I'm a private practitioner, though, and I do have a background in child development. And one of the big things that I felt that was missing early on in my career was when I would walk into neurotypical classrooms talking about inclusion, the importance of acceptance. I too was limited with resources, and just listening to all of the wonderful authors, I found a trend, and it was really thinking that, look, there wasn't something out there. There wasn't anything to share. There wasn't anything to teach our children And so a lot of us, including myself, took it upon ourselves to create something. And, fast forward 20 something years later, I still find myself in the same boat. And that's why I created and wrote my own books. My first one, My Friend Max, which is a story about kindness and compassion. Talks about a neurotypical child who really wants to become friends with Max, who has ASD. And it's through a child's perspective, and it really focuses on what the child's entire school day is like and how they develop this friendship, even though the child has difficulty communicating verbally, has difficulty with some of those sensory challenges, has difficulty making friends, which is such a big myth, right? With individuals who have unique abilities. It's such a big myth that they don't want to engage or don't want to participate or don't have the same interests. And so I went on to publish another book, Winning Her Worries, Teaching Children at a Young Age How to Cope with Stress. And then my daughter, I was listening to the panelists, and she is 17 years old. And what I really have observed through this whole pandemic is the amount of activism, the amount of individuals who really, teenagers and even younger than that, who are going out and showing through their actions all these acts of compassion. And so she herself took it upon her, said, you know what? I really want to celebrate these differences. And so she actually coined the term differentism. And it's really, and I'm going to read it because I feel like I'm going to butcher it, but it says, it means having special qualities and a uniqueness that makes you who you are, but does not limit your ability to do what you love. And she said it was a word that she created for one's own imagination, because we're all unique in our own ways. And so I wanted to kind of start our fireside chat just mentioning that, because sadly, a lot of what is out there is labels. And just listening to everyone on the panel speak, it is sadly something that really defines you. But what if we did flip it and use it as our big strength, as a trait that we want to celebrate?
It's amazing. And it's amazing to hear about all of the tools that exist now, although we need more. So my son is 19, and when he was, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, my nonverbal behaviorally challenged 5-year-old entered school and was pushing into a class of typical peers. Many of them had never met a child with autism before. They didn't understand why he couldn't talk, why he couldn't sit still, why he couldn't attend in the ways that they could. And for his first few years of school, either myself or the school psychologist had to come into the class sort of at the beginning of the year and give like a mini lesson on autism and what it meant and what it looked like and how these kids might try and connect with my son. These were the days before there was a Sesame Street character with autism.
Right.
And it all fell on me, and it was hard, and it was, embarrassing, and it was not my strength to go in and talk to, a group of young kids and try to explain my son to them. And I can only imagine how much easier, my job would have been had there been these kinds of resources back then.
Absolutely. And there's so much research that supports children relate, children understand, they learn better when they see themselves, right? And it goes back, whether it's a 2D picture, an actual image, or even a character.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, having parents who are out there listening and watching right now to diversify your home library. If there is any takeaway, go out and get these books, put it in your home, because the prevalence of meeting someone who is unique and different, whether on the outside or inside, is there. Working in the field, 1990s was when I started. It was 1 in 600 prevalence of autism. And it's about 1 in 54 since it seems like a 2020 updated study. So the chances of all of our children meeting someone who is unique and different is so high. Mm-hmm. And wouldn't it be better for us as parents to be in the driver's seats to start that dialogue and have that conversation and model how it is to treat one another? At the end of the day, it really isn't anything that we're trying to change. We just want to teach acceptance and celebration of just why we are all so different and unique.
Yeah, I think empowering parents is such a critical part of this. I mean, at the end of the day, parents just want their children with disabilities to be included. And it's one thing to have an IEP, and a public school's responsibility to educate your child. It's another to maintain the social and emotional well-being of those kids through interactions with their peers. So any of these materials, books, TV shows, teachers that get it, that teach other children how to interact and include kids who are different will go a long way towards normalizing the experience from early on.
Yeah, it's a great conversation starter. Sometimes it's hard. Parents oftentimes will ask me, how do I have a discussion? Where do I start? And I usually do gravitate towards a Sesame Street, an Arthur show or something, on PBS, or a book from the varied resources that we have, and say, start with this and let your child be the guide. Don't over divulge. Ask them what they think. Let them start the conversation, and you'll be surprised. They actually have great inquisitive ideas and thoughts. And when they're younger, they're such concrete learners that it is very black and white for them. So the more books and materials you use, the better it is to help them understand. And it's never a one and done conversation, right? I mean, it's continuous. And so never think that you have a conversation and then you're done with it. I mean, it will come back, and it is a good thing that it comes back. Curiosity is so important with all our children, and the more curious they are, the more motivated they stay. And so having them ask questions and wonder is a good thing. I mean, those are our engineers and scientists and, CEOs out there who are really constantly asking questions and asking the why.
Agreed. Thank you. I think that's about it for us, unless, did you have anything last that you wanted to add?
No, I thought this was a great discussion, a great chat for us to kind of follow up.
And so exciting listening to all of the panelists.
Yeah.
I think I'm giving it back to Sarah Walzer to close us out.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Walzer from ParentChild Plus. Thank you so much to our phenomenal panelists, Rina and Jenna, and all of our authors. What a great discussion and what important information. And thank you all for joining us, for joining this conversation about the importance of disability representation in children's books. I know that now we are all more informed and more inspired than we were before we got here. So I want to leave you with a few specific ways that you can move forward and make a difference. I know that you want to read these books by these authors. So check out the resources that we will send out and post on our website after the event. Buy the books by these authors you've heard from today and other authors whose books you will find on our sites. Share them with your children. Look at some of these websites and these supportive communities that folks like Jenna have built up for parents across the country, and have some really good conversations with your children, with your family members. That's what this should be a launching point for. At ParentChild Plus, we believe that representation and book selection can be a powerful step towards building a stronger and more equitable world. We are committed to working hand in hand with our partners across the country, with our community-based staff and families, to build a society where children and families feel seen and heard. We believe in listening to and amplifying the voices of families and staff and communities, and working together to bring about systemic change. And we are committed to the personal, organizational, and community work that must take place to make this happen. As we realize our mission to close the equity gap, we know that parents are not just their children's first teachers, they're their children's most important teachers, advocates, and supporters. And so we, by supporting parents and families early with reading materials, with good conversations, with support groups, are building a world where the next generation will be able to thrive. We are giving them a world that embodies the diversity, the inclusivity, the representation, and is culturally relevant. And that's something that I want to thank all of the authors and panelists today for helping us move towards. So thank you so much for spending a small part of your evening with us. Please stay tuned for our next Windows, Mirrors, and Doors event, which will be on the importance of the representation of Indigenous peoples in children's books. It will be in November, which is Indigenous Peoples Month. And we will hear from another amazing group of children's book authors and educators. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Good night.